Welcome to another episode of Subconscious Realms. I'm your host, General Lee. Tonight we have the host of another recent show with some incredible content with elite level guests. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honour and privilege to have such an opportunity to present to you Todd and Mimi from Goodness Over Darkness podcast.
Hello, my friend.
Todd.
How are you?
Hello.
Well, thank you. Hello.
Hey, thanks for having us on.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, sir. Thank you.
You've had some good guests so far. I saw you had the New York Patriot. You've had on Josh
Yeah,
Monday.
he's
You
top
had
lad.
on Gary Wayne. Some really good.
Yeah.
And, what was Fire? What was his name? Chuck.
Fire Theft. Chuck from Fire Theft Radio.
Yeah, that one's.
Yeah, he's a top lad.
Yeah, I listened to about the first half of that episode, and it's really interesting. I definitely want to catch his podcast. I never heard of him before, so you introduced me to that already.
Thank you. I'd like to give Josh Monday a shout out as well because he's supported me from the beginning. He's been there for me. A good friend. He's like a brother to me. He's a top lad, and he actually introduced me to you as well.
Right, and Ron Weed actually turned me on to you.
Ron, yeah,
like a week earlier, and so when Josh said it, I was like, oh, okay, it's two people in 1 week.
You knew who he was.
Yeah,
it's brilliant, isn't it? It's nice how it's the community's all connected in a way.
Right. So what do you want to get into today?
Well, I'm interested in the part called the rapture.
Okay, right, because I do. So anyone in your audience who isn't familiar with me, I think that the rapture has occurred in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Now, I don't know if it looks like the cartoon version that everyone thinks of, where a big thing of light just starts sucking people up and people are hung in the sky. I don't know if that is the case, but I think that there's something to the effect of the Bible where it says the first destruction of the earth will come from water, which is Noah's flood. That happened, obviously. And the second destruction would be from fire, which I am uncovering a lot of evidence of the mud flood. Not that I'm uncovering it, but I'm understanding about the mud flood that happened in the 1800s, and that the covered up history that has occurred. And I think what they're covering up is the second destruction of the world, as God said. And so everyone right now thinks that we're at a point in time where the rapture is about to occur. That there's like the 7-year tribulation is happening now. I think that's all fake. I think it's all contrived by Satan, essentially. I don't know if it's Satan is one particular being or person or whatever, but I think that the energy that is running the show is making us believe that we're in the 7-year tribulation. And I think that's all contrived. I don't think that's real. I think that it already happened, and that's what the cover up with the mud floods. I don't think that the mud floods were purposely done. I know a lot of people think that there were directed energy weapons that caused these mud floods. I think that God probably caused it, because I think that the rapture occurred. There's a lot of missing people. There's a lot to it. There's a huge wealth of information that has led me to this path. So are you familiar with the mud flood at all?
Not yet, no. I have got it on my list to look into, but
it's a lot to it. Yeah, Tartaria, are you familiar with?
I'm not. No, that's one. Gary's going to jump on and go through Tartaria with me, Gary Wayne.
Okay, yeah. There's a lot of different stuff here that happened in the late 1700s and throughout the 1800s that has given me reason to believe that is what the cover-up is. So for anyone who's not familiar with the mud flood, what essentially happened was people started realizing that there are many cities around the world and around the United States that have these buildings that just have windows that are at mud level, doors that are at mud level, the floor level, that it's as if someone built a window that was underground, it appears. And then we find all these pictures of the early 1900s where people are digging out these buildings, that they are digging down into the ground and finding a whole floor that previously wasn't known, that it was as if someone just built on top of it wherever the mud was and they just kept building. So we have evidence in the Easter Island. Are you familiar with Easter Island? There's big old heads.
Yeah, I've seen them. I don't know much about them. I just know that they're there.
Yeah, well, for a very long time, they were just heads. It appeared that these really big heads, statues, maybe like 6 to 10 feet tall. And then a few years ago, they decided to dig them out, and they found 40 feet of statue covered up. That
under the head.
Yeah, that wasn't just a head; it was a whole statue. It was 40 foot tall, and it was like a person.
Right.
Yeah, they also have uncovered Göbekli Tepe. Are you familiar with that?
I know a little about it, but
okay, well, yeah. So Graham Hancock is really big into Göbekli Tepe, and the theory that is posited is, for some unknown reason, this was purposely buried and covered up, and it looks like someone purposely covered this up for whatever reason. But if it was a mud flood, then it would appear as if it was purposely covered up, but it was just flooded with mud. So that's my take on it, is that it's part of the mud flood, that all this stuff that they're finding, they're uncovering, is just part of the mud flood. So these buildings, like I was saying, and it goes with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Are you familiar with the Leaning Tower of Pisa?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and there's many actually leaning towers. I think there's like 7 or 8 of them throughout the world, where there's these buildings that are just crooked. Well, that would result from a mud flood. So a mud flood, it sounds so ridiculous on the face of it. You hear the word mud flood, you're like, what does that mean? Well, there's a thing called soil liquefaction that happens when you have a giant earthquake, and you can do science experiments to see how it actually looks. I'm sure on TikTok or, whatever website, Instagram, Twitter, that there's different videos going around showing people doing science experiments of this, where it's just mud, and then there's like a little model house, and there's a little machine that's just shaking this aquarium back and forth, and eventually the dirt, it's not even mud, it's dirt, and it liquefies and becomes mud, and then the model house just sinks into it. And so there's that can happen. There's also a lot of water. If something gets flooded with water, it can cause a mud flood. The dirt can just liquefy, and also from heating can liquefy the dirt from lava, or from if a comet were to strike the earth really hot, it could then melt the dirt all of a sudden and liquefy it. So it's a very real thing, soil liquefaction. So when we look around at all these different things, we're like, oh, there was definitely a mud flood. We can see that there was a mud flood. Now, there also are pictures of these empty cities in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, all around the world, where there's just no people, complete cities that are already built, and there's no people. Now, I don't actually use that as part of my evidence. I know a lot of people assume that is part of my evidence, but with that, there could be the way that they used to take pictures. It could be that nobody appears to be in the picture, but it could have actually had people in the pictures. So I don't use that as part of my evidence. And a lot of people think that's the only evidence, and they discount it based on, saying that the pictures, you can't rely on those pictures. Okay, so get that out of your minds, anybody listening. So my evidence that I like to look at is in the late 1700s. In 1772, we had this man, Emanuel Swedenborg, died. So Emanuel Swedenborg, he was born in like 1688, I believe. I always forget the year, but it's something around there, 1694, something like that. He was born. He's a top-notch scientist, like the number one scientist in all of Sweden. He was actually born Emanuel Swedenborg, but he was given the honorary name Emanuel Swedenborg because he was so well respected in Sweden, and he became a member of parliament in Sweden. So the new Christ Church is in his honor. You know how like Mormon, they made their own thing based on Joe Smith, or whatever. You know, all these different religions pop up. Well, the new Christ Church is in honor of Emanuel Swedenborg. So what happened was in the 1740s, on Easter of all days, he just woke up, you know, from sleep, and Jesus was at the end of his bed in spirit form, and told him that the second coming was happening, that the rapture was about to occur, that all this was unfolding. So he became very, very psychic all of a sudden, and he started telling people about all these different things, predicting things, telling people things that only them and their dead relative knew, you know, something super secret that somehow he had access to. So he would prove this again and again. And because he was so scientifically inclined, you know, he was like an atheist, dead spiritually, until this event happened. So it was a very significant change in this man. And also his name was Emmanuel. Emmanuel, not, you know, I spell mine with an I, but he was Emmanuel, which the Bible actually says Emmanuel will announce the second coming. So this is all very biblical type of information that I'm talking about here. So he predicts his own death 8 months before. He says when he'll die, or he doesn't even say when he'll die. He uses different terminology, but he says March 29th, 1772, I won't be here anymore. That'll be the last time you see me, something to that effect. And that's the day he died. So then in 1773, we have the Jesuits are exiled out of everywhere. Jesuits, which Josh Monday and his brother Jason, they do a really good job of breaking down the Jesuits. So the Jesuits are behind a lot of things. If anyone wants to look into them, they're not a good group of people, but they use the name of Jesus in order to infiltrate the world.
They're Catholic.
Essentially, they're the Order of Jesus is what they call themselves. So they are expelled in 1773. Then 1776, we have both the United States of America has its Declaration of Independence, and we also have the Bavarian Illuminati are started by Adam Weishaupt. 1776 happens, both of them. Now, what's happening in the Americas, which we're not told about in our history books, is that the Moorish people are being killed off by the Europeans. So there were this group of people that lived in the Americas called the Moors, and we're not told this. And apparently they were part of Islam in some sense. That's the way history remembers them. I don't think that's actually the case, but whatever happened, I'm not sure of. But there was this group of people called the Moors who lived all throughout America.
And sorry, mate. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's all right. I was just asking the Moors. I'm not familiar with that. Is that Native American, or are they?
No. So say this is the thing. So we're told that only Native Americans were running around with, feathers on their head and skirts, and they lived in little teepees. And that couldn't be further from the truth. That there was actually cities here, and there were great statues and all sorts of things, which I'll get into momentarily here. But so the Moors, they come from Africa, the Middle East. The oldest known civilization in America are actually come from Louisiana, part of Louisiana, and they are of African descent, but way, way, way before any quote unquote slaves are brought here from Africa. That there were a lot of Africans here, but it had nothing to do with slave ships. I don't even know if they're African. Honestly, they're of black skin color, that what we determine to be black, but I don't
Right.
know exactly where they're from. Okay, so I want to put that out there. I don't know if they're African or not, but they are what we consider black. So they were here already, and we're told it was only Native Americans, but there was they're called a Russian horde was also here, is what we're told in history. A Russian horde was wiped off, but it was actually the Moors that were wiped off the
Right.
from the existence. So
Right.
this was in the 1770s, and then the United States of America is formed essentially. So if we fast forward a little bit, we have the World War that happened in 1812. Was We're not told it's a world war. We're told it's the French and Indian War. Again, it's more lies telling us it's the French fighting these Native Americans that they call Indians to confuse us, because they knew, they were very well aware of North America and South America. They were not confused. Christopher Columbus didn't accidentally come here and call them Indians. That is all lies. They were very well aware of the Moorish people living in North and South America. So that's all a cover up, all of that stuff. And a lot of people today recognize that the Christopher Columbus story is obviously BS, and that it didn't happen that way. So
Did the Templars go over to America?
what was that?
The Templars, Knights Templars, did they come over to America?
I'm sure that they did.
Apparently.
Yeah, I'm sure that they did. That maybe they're the Vikings that we're told landed here before Columbus. That they were warring and they were trying to bring, quote unquote, trying to bring Christ here. But again, they're just another name for Jesuits before Jesuits were named that. They were
right.
the warriors, essentially, that of this Catholic Inquisition that happened all over the world, the Christian Crusades, that they were the soldiers for them. So
Yeah.
In 1812, we have the French and Indian War going on, but it's not Indians. It's they're fighting the rest of the Moors that were here that weren't wiped out in the 1770s. And also the French are fighting in Russia at the same exact time, 400,000 troops in Moscow. So there's obviously the French, for whatever reason, are having a world war, that they're in both hemispheres fighting on foreign territory and making ground, strong enough to push through in both directions. So what happens is they end up getting wiped out in Moscow. But the thing is, the Russians, their capital city was St. Petersburg, which is also a very biblical thing, the gates of St. Peter's. If you look at the city of St. Petersburg, it's like the most beautiful architecture there is. And that could have been, quote unquote, the gate of St. Peter's that we're told it exists in heaven, but it could have been an earthly thing at that time. Because again, we're lied to about our history and everything's confused and we don't know what's what. So they get wiped out in Moscow, and Moscow had Muscovites, which were giants. That's what the French were actually going after. They were trying to wipe out this horde of giants that existed
in Russia.
Yes, in Russia. Yeah. So
is this in the 1800s?
Yes, this is 1812. Yes. Yeah. So
sorry, Tom. What are the giants called again?
The giants. So from Moscow, they were the Muscovites.
Muscovites.
Yeah, they were the giants over there. So all of these quote unquote giants are essentially descendants of the tribes of Israel. So we have the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They weren't lost. They all went all around the world in different places and set up shop in the Americas, in the Netherlands, in Europe, in Russia. All the different 10 tribes, they went their own separate ways when they were freed from Egypt. And if you can imagine, these tribes of Israel were giants. So what was in Egypt were even more giant. They're the ones with the elongated heads that aren't actually human. that's who was controlling the giant tribes of Israel. So there's a whole completely perverted thing that we're told is, oh, that maybe some Egyptians were like 7 feet tall and they used to try to make their heads elongated with wood. That's all lies to cover up what was actually here. So the French were trying to wipe out the tribes of Israel for whatever reason. Then we get into 1816. We have the year without a summer, which biblically speaking, the sun would be blackened. It would be darkened. And that's exactly what happened for not just 1 year, but this was like about 7 years this lasted for. There was one full year where it was a some kind of nuclear winter, that there was nothing, there was no sun for an entire year, and it was snowing with this different ash because a volcano exploded. So this is what I'm talking about when we have the mud flood. This is part of this. So I think that some kind of comet hit the earth and caused this eruption from the volcano. And in some places of the earth, you have the mud being melted from the volcano. In some places, you have the mud being melted from the comet hitting. In some places, you have the mud becoming liquefied from earthquakes, because if a comet was to hit the earth, it would set off all these different events. Now, what also happens was, so the comet hits the earth, and then all of a sudden, so a big fireball would happen, and fire would just be happening all over the place. And when a fire occurs, it just keeps growing by eating up the oxygen. So anything that was very large here all of a sudden wouldn't have enough oxygen to sustain it any longer. So it sucks it up. And not only that, but it runs out of oxygen to keep the fire going. So then all of a sudden it just goes out. So then everything would flash freeze, because it would be so hot and that things would start melting. And then all of a sudden it's a quote unquote winter, a nuclear winter would happen. Exactly what happened with the year without a summer, this 7-year period from 1816 to 1823. So that all occurs, and then we have the Civil War that happens in the United States. Well, I think the Civil War was the 1860s, so even before that, we have this weird thing with the World's Fairs, where there's all these crystal palaces, and this is a very weird thing. Also, we have the gold rush from the 1849. The 49ers football team is in honor of this gold rush that happened in 1849 to San Francisco and California. And it turns out that California used to be an island, and there used to be a body of water that went in between where we now call Nevada and Utah and New Mexico, Arizona. That desert there used to be a body of water, and that body of water was called the Red Sea. Very strange. We're not, you can find this on maps, but it's not in our history. It's covered up history. So what the gold rush actually was, where people were finding this island called California, and homes and mansions and all these different things. Now, San Francisco is one of these cities that is on slopes. So what I was saying in the beginning with the mud floods, how well, that's exactly what San Francisco is. San Francisco is a gold mine of mud floods, of all of those hills and all. It's all built on pyramids that were over there, I believe. That all of that was just melted. I don't know. A lot of people think that mountains are melted buildings, which they have evidence for. Not every mountain, but that some of these mountains were melted buildings, which these buildings would be so grand. It seems very far out there, but when you start to look at the evidence,
I think it's odd. Anything's possible. Anything. Yeah,
for sure.
I said, especially with how things are covered up from us.
Yeah.
It's a fucking joke.
Yeah, once you start looking into our covered up history from 200 years ago, I mean, it starts blowing your mind, the technology that they must have had, because these buildings, so what we have left still of these buildings, this old world architecture that exists. They tell us the English, the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, that they all went around conquering all at the same time, all building the same exact buildings that we couldn't build today in the time frame that they built it. They had dirt roads. They didn't have vehicles. They had horse and buggy, and they were building these structures that were so elaborate. So the art, the everything about these places couldn't be reproduced today in the time frame that they did it back then. So, and it's all color coordinated, doesn't matter if it's English, French, Spanish, whatever, it's being built at the same time at the same exact colors, the same exact type of architecture. So that's just all BS. I mean, you can just see the BS on it. You got star forts, which are called bastion forts. I mean, it's just all the same stuff being built over. So in 1850, we have, so what I was saying with the Red Sea is what they were doing is they were actually sucking up the water to look for gold, quote unquote, look for gold that was in this Red Sea, but it wasn't gold they were looking for. They were just getting rid of the water, getting rid of the evidence of that California was an island. And that's why you have all that desert out there now, because it was the bottom of the sea. You have the Utah Salt Lake City. It's the only lake with salt water in it because it was part of the ocean. The ocean just went up that far, and they couldn't get rid of that because it's down in a valley. So they had all these different techniques to do this water, and you can actually look all this up. This is legitimate stuff that they were doing during this gold rush. So there's also no tombstones. There's no gravestones before 1850. It's a strange phenomena that I don't know if it's worldwide, but it's at least in North America that there's no gravestones before 1850. The ones that you can find are, I think, before 1780. So there's like between 1780 and 1850, there's no headstones, there's no tombstones. And there's some that are obviously faked, that are like someone took a hammer and chisel and just did it all at the same time, and it's just like complete nonsense.
I'll have a look for that. I'm going close to a graveyard next week, so I'll have a look and let you know.
Yeah, I've had on a guest, Ryan Alexander, who he travels worldwide to and now he's looking at the different graveyards to try to find anything between that time frame, and he can't. He's going around multiple countries all over the place and can't find anything between 1780 and 1850.
Yeah,
and
I mean,
go ahead.
Sorry, go. No, it's all right. It's okay.
I was going to say, I don't know if he actually found anything before 1780. So there's something with 1780, but I know there's nothing in between 1780 and 1850.
Okay.
So then we also have in America, we have all these pyramids that we're not told are pyramids. They're called serpent mounds all over Ohio. There's a lot of different things, bones that were being uncovered in the 1900s and 1800s of giants, and it's all suppressed. It's very difficult to handle the bones, and they can just disintegrate if you don't handle it correctly, it'll disintegrate. And the ones that were covered up by the Smithsonian. Now there's tens of thousands of newspaper articles all around North America from the 1800s and 1900s that talk about giants, tens of thousands. And we're told that that's just a conspiracy theory. But it's quite obvious when you start putting it together that no, it's a cover-up. It's a obvious cover-up.
Are they the Nephilim giants, Todd?
Well, could be.
Right,
I don't, because humanity in itself was much bigger. So what I was saying, when the oxygen left here and the flash freezing happened, is we look at these rock structures, and there's different groups on Instagram and Facebook that show you these pictures. They're called SIB. It's seeing is believing, but it's SIB on Facebook and Instagram. You can look up the different ones. It is they show rock formations that they have human features. They look not just human, but animals as well. They look like rock formations as if they were just frozen in place and became a rock, that they were fossilized instantly. So massive things. I mean, massive things that could have been the Titans, could have been Nephilim. I don't know exactly what it was, but rock giants we have all throughout history. In all different cultures, they talk about giants, frost giants, rock giants, all types of weird stuff. So there's evidence for that actually happening. So what in the 1850s also happens is the Carrington event. 1859, there is a plasma event, an electrical event that happens, which our sun sends down rays, a CME, a coronal mass ejection, hits the earth, and it's so strong that the telegraph system that was around at that time, people that are working on it are actually shocked the moment it happens. And if it were to happen today, it would wipe out our grid completely. And our electromagnetic field, since the Carrington event happened, has been decelerate or declining at an astronomical rate. It's actually 25% weaker now than it was when the Carrington event hit in 1859. So in 1859, I believe that is when some kind of transference happened. I don't know exactly what happened, but when we look at the Catholic Church, all their depictions of saints all have a halo around them, uh, a gold ball of light around the heads of all these people. Right. And we also have all these gargoyle statues in the Catholic Church. Now, if we want to go biblical, it says that there will be a race of scorpion beings that fly up out of the earth and start wreaking havoc. Now, if you look at a gargoyle as being the scorpion race that was the Bible was talking about, well, then it makes sense of why they would have all these sculptures of gargoyles around this time. What we're told, I'm not even sure what the reasoning is behind gargoyles, but it's just made up nonsense. Everything.
The scorpion beings you're talking about, have they been out, or are they going to be coming out of the abyss or whatever it is?
I'm not sure if it's going to happen again. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm sure that gargoyles were real things that were here, and I think that they could very well be the demons. They could be physical demons, maybe not the scorpion race, but they were some kind of demonic thing. If you look at a gargoyle, I mean, it's very demonic looking.
Yeah, they do.
Right. So there was some kind of switcheroo, I believe, where the gargoyles came out and the Catholic Church was then taken over by the demons and Satan, and the saints that were here and Christ, everyone who was a Christ-like being went somewhere else. They were no longer here. I think the Carrington event was a switcheroo, because in 1860, so before I get to the 1860 part, we are all electrical beings and we're in an electrical universe. This is why we have the sun have CMEs and do these different things, and it affects us because we're electrical. So all the mental illness we have, all the physical illness we have, they are all electrical signals that are throwing us off in one way or another. So in 1860, the seasonal flu comes around for the first time, where we had the flu in a way that it would only be in pockets of years. There'd be like 3 years people would get sick. They wouldn't be sick for 3 years, but they would have the flu would be around for 3 years or maybe 5 years. But then for the next 10, 15, 20 years, there would be no flu. And then in 1860, it was a recurring thing. Every year there would be a flu. So the seasonal flu starts in 1860. Then in 65 to 67, we have anxiety and depression start to become things, which again, this is after that electrical event, the Carrington event, and there's some kind of frequency change in our atmosphere where we're getting sick and we're becoming mentally ill. So not just physically ill with the flu, but mentally ill with anxiety and depression. So, and we also have the Civil War in America happening around that time. And during all this time, the World's Fairs are occurring, which are actually covering up these uh, beautiful buildings that the more people had, these crystal palaces that were all around the world with these dome shapes. So now we call them religious buildings. We call them churches and mosques, but they were not that back then. They were energy buildings. They were some kind of healing centers. They were our hospitals. But now we have these castles that are psychiatric centers. We have these castles that people are living at, but there's no indoor heating or air conditioning, which some people say, okay, that wasn't a modern thing back then, but they did have different ductwork systems for heating and cooling, but it wasn't the air conditioning that we have, but they designed it in a certain way. They also didn't have any indoor plumbing, which plumbing was a thing that existed, and they had these beautiful fountains that would shoot water out, but they didn't have bathrooms, they didn't have indoor plumbing, they didn't have heating and cooling. Why would they not design these buildings, these castles that the royals would live at, and they would have an outhouse? I don't think so. Because these were energy buildings. They had nothing to do with religion. So religion is a thing that was created during this reset, this time period. Religion was a thing that was made up. They gave us Christianity, Judaism, Islam in the 1800s. That didn't exist before that, in my opinion. In my opinion, it was just the truth was being spread, and the Bible was just people were keeping track of current events, and every so often every generation would add a book to it, like this is what happened during this event, and they tell us it's the Old Testament, but it's actually just history. That's what they were just keeping track of everything. So that this is all that happened, and the World's Fairs occur in all these different cities 5, 10, 15, 20 years after each of these cities had major fires. I mean, major fires. Every single city across America and the world had fires that were so destructive that they burned down concrete buildings, and not just burned them down, some of them completely. This is what they tell us anyway. It's obvious nonsense that, a fire couldn't just rip through a city that would just melt concrete. I mean, you have to imagine how hot that would be, but it's not just the concrete melted, but it's actually blasted off. Like if you look at Boston's their fire, the remnants, it looks like it was a war zone. It was like an actual war that was happening, because these buildings, they're all like in half. Like if you look at one of these walls, they're all like on a complete slant, like broken off, like something bombed these buildings. It doesn't look like a fire, and if it was, it brings to question, why would you have these World's Fairs? Well, some people think that, okay, they built the World's Fairs to bring tourism in, but in my opinion, you're not going to build these fantastical buildings. I mean, you got to really check out these World's Fairs. They have electrical things that were very rare for that time, that day and age. It existed, but it was very rare. Like in Buffalo, the amount of electricity they had elevators going. I mean, just if you could think of an elevator in like the 1890s, like they had that. They had these strings of lights that, I mean, it was very rare to have this, but they're building it for World's Fairs, which were built in 2 to 3 years, is what they tell us. And they tell us that these buildings were built of plaster and wood. That's how they built it so quickly. And they do it in the city. So why would you come in and build all these structures? I mean, one of them was like 1,000,000 feet, like 1,000 square feet. Like one building would be like 1,000 square feet. Like all these things would be so massive, or not 1,000, like 100,000 square feet. Like just these massive one buildings, and they were like so much to it. I mean, I can't even tell any of our listeners right now how many buildings there were, like just miles, thousands of miles of different things. So so they tell us this was all built in 2 to 3 years with dirt roads. That's another thing, with horse and buggy on dirt roads. This is how they're doing it. And then they just get rid of it at the end. They just burn it all down, right? So they just take everything down and burn it, except that those buildings are still in use today, and government buildings, high schools are now in these buildings, colleges, museums, I mean, libraries, they're still in use today, and they're these massive structures that look like Greco-Roman style buildings, these massive pillars, and so on and so forth. So it's, wait a second, you're telling us all the buildings were made out of wood and plaster, and you got rid of all of them, except every city kept one of them, and it's still in use today. So how did they transfer wood and plaster into cement that is better constructed than anything we could make today? And it makes absolutely no sense.
It does. It makes no sense, does it?
Right. And then you have the Titanic. Maybe the Titanic was a sinking of other technology that they had that they got rid of. Maybe the Titanic could have been Noah's Ark to some effect, or something.
Right.
Maybe not Noah's Ark, but some kind of massive ship that was holding people that were preparing for some kind of devastating flood, or maybe a mud flood. There's a massive influx of water being shifted around and all. And so when I was saying the flash freezing, there's actually, we're told in the 1300s there was a mini ice age. So when we start looking at all this, okay, so now I laid out all the evidence of why I think the rapture occurred. Okay, so now we have to think biblically, how does that make sense? Was Jesus 2,000 years ago, and we see that there was all this type of biblical prophecy and events that were occurring up until Jesus's life, and then we're made to believe that nothing happened in the last 2,000 years. There's been no prophets, there's been no biblical events. I mean, according to the Bible, once Jesus comes, that there's still other events that occur, the massive events that occur that we would know about. So then we start looking into our timeline and our history, and we have approximately 700 to 1,000 years of history that is just added in. It doesn't exist. Somebody just wrote it in a book. So when we start looking at different things, we have the Dark Ages. We're told about from year 500 to 1500. And that might not have existed at all. And we have to remember how this group of controllers operates. They pervert and invert everything. So they tell us the Dark Ages was probably an enlightening period. And then they tell us the enlightening period happens after. That was probably the dark period. And the Bible talks about a dark period that would happen, which is probably what they call the enlightening period, which was when they went around destroying everything, when they went around conquering in what we're told is the 1500s and 1600s, but was probably more likely the 500s and 600s. So what is my evidence for 1,000 years missing? Well, when we start looking at maps, tombstones, and coins from our history, they were all marked with, it would say Anno Domini, which is AD, which means in the year of our Lord. And then it would say I 650 or J 650. But now we take this to mean 1650. We're told that these are from 1650. So there you have 1,000 years, boom, just added on, because they're misinterpreting this coin for saying 1650, but it says I 650. So what does the I or the J mean? Because a J wasn't in every language, and I is in every language. So what would that mean? Well, Jesus's name in in Greek and Latin would be Jesus with an I. It would not be a J, but then there are other languages where it would be Jesus with a J. So it could have been in the year of our Lord Jesus 650. That's what that means. And it was actually, it was only a few hundred years ago. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't 1400 years ago. It was 400 years ago. So they add in this pocket of 1,000 years to make us think that we're 2,000 years since Jesus was here, that nothing, no prophetic biblical things have occurred. It's been that long, so you might as well give up. God isn't coming to help you. You might as well just give into all your pleasures. So this time period stops in the 700s when they stop keeping track of time that way, which would be the 1700s, which is again what I started off with, Emanuel Swedenborg in the 1700s. So we have all of this happening. And what is 1,000-year period? If 1,000 years is missing, why would they be covering it up? Well, according to the Bible, or at some point in human history, we would have the millennial kingdom, a reign of 1,000 years of Satan not influencing anybody, that this 1,000-year period would happen when it would just be humanity dealing with humanity's own bad decisions, good decisions, whatever. It would just be all humans, and Satan would be bound in a pit for 1,000 years. So if 1,000 years is missing from our history, which it is, and we have all this evidence that there was in the year of our Lord, which was apparently, it was a very big deal that they would say on these coins, Anno Domini I 650. We don't do that today because we think like that's, that was cavemen. They were dumb. They were offending all these other religions, these atheists and these Buddhists and whatever. They want to tell us all that. None of that existed back then. Everyone just knew the truth. Everyone came from a similar understanding of what was going on in our world.
Yeah.
But so we are at the point now where the millennial kingdom probably ended somewhere around the year 2001. So why do I say 2001? So we have Jesus's birth was most likely September 11th, 9/11, which the Ethiopian calendar starts, their first day of the year is 9/11. The Ethiopian Bible is the only Bible that has the Book of Enoch still a part of it. So Enoch was from Ethiopia, which also Ethiopia has the Ark of the Covenant, which was just stolen by the Eritrean Defense Forces 2 years ago. That started right at the same time as COVID happened. They went and murdered 800 to 1,000 church members in the alleged location of the Ark of the Covenant. They just massacred these people.
Was the Ark meant to be?
What was that?
What is it meant to be, Todd, please?
What was it meant to be?
The Ark, whereabouts is it meant to be?
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant is it's a biblical thing that it's not really described all that well, but it's some kind of device that would I don't really know, it would blind people if they looked at it. I don't know the details of it all that well. It would somehow make, I don't know if it would make food or it would do something for them. It was some kind of device that they would carry, and it had like, I don't know, it's depicted in all these different movies, the Ark of the Covenant. You guys can look that up. I don't know a lot about that.
But Todd, where is it located?
Ethiopia.
Right. Sorry.
Right. So Ethiopia is very important in our history, and we're told that there's some poor African nation that they don't know anything. That they're so poor that there's the way they're depicted on South Park. They're super skinny, have huge heads. They just pervert all the truth. So anyway, Enoch is from there because in the book of Enoch, he describes going over the Eritrean Sea, which we actually know as the Red Sea. So again, there's a Red Sea in California. There's also a Red Sea in Africa. So 9/11 is Jesus's birthday. A lot of biblical scholars believe this to be true. This isn't my just claiming this. A lot of people believe that he was born on 9/11. So 9/11 in Ethiopia, the first day of the year. We have 9/11 2001, in American history. We have the Twin Towers being brought down. And now one tower stands there, which is the reverse of what happened to the Tower of Babel, which is Revelation 11:9. So if you inverse 11:9, you have 9/11. So it went from the Tower of Babel, went from one building being cut in half to now it was two. So you have the reverse happening. You have the two buildings being collapsed and made into one. Before that, 37 years prior, you had the killing of the king, JFK's assassination, which a lot of people think that Jesus might have been 37 when he was killed, which again, 37 years. It's just the inverse. They're reversing everything, just how they reversed and made the two towers into one. Jesus started off being killed, the killing of the king, 37 years in. And so 37 years to the end of Satan's time in the pit is when they killed the king again. So this was just them establishing dominance. They infiltrated these demons and what have you. They infiltrated the United States on JFK's killing, and they solidified their position as ruling the United States on 9/11 2001. It was absolutely a war crime. There was a missile that went into the Pentagon and they took over. They actually took over our government, and nobody understands that is what happened, that demons took over our government on 9/11 2001. I mean, a lot of people think it's about money and covering up money, which that was part of it, sure, but it was demons taking over the United States government. And demons,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the demons, so demons come from a frequency that our technology produces. They come out of our different technologies. So they're somehow mimicking they're entering into these people, these secret societies and all. They give themselves over, the one eye symbolism. You want to talk about the symbolism? Well, the one eye symbolism is them giving themselves over to the technology, that they're becoming one with it, the transhumanism, if you will.
Right.
That's what's happening. The all-seeing eye, the Agent Smith effect, and the Matrix being able to pop up out of anybody who's not awake, because everybody gives themselves over to the machine. They don't know that they're doing it, but secret societies do, and that's what the one eye symbolism is. That's what the black eye club is all about, is that something's being injected into the eye that is allowing the demon to freely move about. And this is why you have, like, Beyonce has Sasha Fierce, where she'll actually have a demon come out of her and she talks about it. It's named Sasha Fierce. Lady Gaga has some boy inside of her. Nicki Minaj has Roman. This is actually happening, that there are demons coming out of these people. Eminem has Slim Shady. So Marshall Mathers has Eminem and Slim Shady. So there's a multiple thing happening there. It's in all of our entertainment. It's all across everything.
Sounds crazy.
Yeah, so 9/11 2001 was some kind of celebration, some kind of takeover, where Satan's being loosed from the pit. And it also, so if 1,000 years is missing, and we're talking about 9/11 2001, 1,000 years missing, that would mean it would be 9/11 1001. And we wouldn't start at the year 0, we would have started at the year 1. And why would time start being kept track of when a lot of people think Jesus's birth was 6 BC, 7 BC, 4 BC, 3 AD, 8 AD? There's all these different times thrown out. Nobody actually knows when he was born, but if we were keeping track of time because of his birth, then obviously he would be born on 9/11/1, right? 9/11, the year 1. But maybe we were keeping track of time for a different reason, because we do know that Satan tempted Jesus to have whatever kingdom he wanted on earth, as if Jesus was to pledge his allegiance to Satan, which he turned down. So maybe it was we started keeping track of time when Satan was thrown into the pit. Maybe that was a reason to start keeping track of time, because we had a countdown happening. And if you remember Y2K, 99 going into 2000, everyone was so worried about the technology. What would happen? There was this huge countdown, right? Well, maybe the countdown was actually for 2001, 9/11, 2001, which I mean, everybody that was involved in it, they knew when it was going to happen. It was constructed 33 years earlier. There's a lot of symbolism put into it. They knew they were basically built to be destroyed. There's so much that goes with it that they knew 2001 was a countdown for them, and there was something that was occurring. So to me, I think that we started keeping track of time because Satan was locked in the pit. And this was probably after Jesus resurrected is when we started keeping track of time, because they say before Christ. Well, he was a man when before he was resurrected, he wasn't Christ yet. He was just a man. Then he was resurrected. That's probably when time was, they started keeping track of time, was when the resurrection happened. And that is when Satan was bound in the pit. And it was 9/11, 2001 was actually 9/11, 1001. And that is when Satan started being loosed from the pit. And now we have Agenda 2030 that everyone seems to be rushing towards. There was Agenda 21, which we all can see what happened in 2020 and 2021 so far. And they are rushing things in a strange way. I mean, a lot of people are waking up to all the deception that's occurring, but they're rushing towards Agenda 2030. They want to have so many different things happening. Why is that? Well, maybe that's when their Lord, Satan, is finally completely loose from the pit and starts taking his reign. So a lot of people talk about the alien invasion, the possible alien invasion that's going to be coming. I think it's probably, aliens don't actually exist. They are the offspring of fallen angels. They are demons. They are Nephilim to some degree. All of this DNA manipulation that the fallen angels were doing, mixing human DNA with animal DNA in order to get these bird-headed beings that we see in Egypt, these dog-headed beings that we see in Catholic. Saint Christopher is a dog-headed being. We have so many different hybrids that the hybrids are probably the Nephilim. Dinosaurs, what we think of as dinosaurs, were probably the Nephilim. Certain giants, one-eyed ogres that were talked about in Tolkien's different things, Middle Earth and all that, they're probably Nephilim. That all these abominations, these things that shouldn't be, are Nephilim. And I think that the mark of the beast may have existed already as well, when we have dogs and cats just popping up out of nowhere 10,000 years ago, allegedly 10,000 years ago, that wolves became dogs. I don't buy that for a second. And the cats just appeared on some island off of the coast of India. I don't believe that happened either. And Egypt worshipped cats as some kind of witches or something to that effect. I think that what's happening now with the medical industry is the graphene oxide is like black goo, and it's an mRNA thing, and it can change your DNA. It's actually alive. It's a living thing that reacts to frequencies, and it can change your DNA to change you into a beast, the mark of the beast. The pigs share so much of our DNA, and monkeys as well share so much of our DNA. Well, we'll just stick for the pigs for a second, that they can grow human babies in them. They can grow human body parts in them. That they are actually the byproduct of hu- the fallen angel manipulation of human DNA plus boars. Wild boars would give us pigs, and monkeys, that human DNA plus a certain type of, I don't know, chimpanzee, apes. I'm not sure exactly what it would be, but human DNA plus their DNA would make a new breed of quote unquote monkey. And also, human DNA plus lion DNA might make some kind of cat. And human DNA and wolf DNA might make some kind of dog. I believe that is probably what the mark of the beast was. And that all of this has already occurred. And we think nothing has happened. We're led to believe that no biblical things, no prophetic things have happened, and I think it all happened already, and that we're about to be at the final judgment. And this is why they're pulling all the same tricks again from history. They're pulling all the same operations, and we can see it in the conspiracy theorist community, that we're like, oh, it's so obvious to us, because they're running the same playbook. Why would they run the same playbook? Because it worked before. But now when the final judgment is coming, where Jesus is going to come back in the clouds, and he is going to, everyone's going to bend the knee to Jesus Christ and recognize him as our Lord and Savior. And everyone will recognize that Jesus Christ is our creator, is the one true living God that came down in the form of humanity in order to save us from our own devices, because we don't know what we're doing at all in this place, and we've just been tricked by Satan.
Tell you what, mate, that is it's crazy and it's fascinating.
That it is for sure.
Yeah, you've gone through an awful lot there.
Mm-hmm.
I've got so many things I've written down, but I'm going to have to look into.
Yeah. Well, if you have any questions of any of it, go ahead and ask away.
Well, you mentioned this the flood, the mud flood.
Mm-hmm.
It was triggered by earthquakes, or as you say, it was some sort of weapon.
So a lot of people think it was directed energy weapons. I don't know.
Well, they had that technology back then.
Oh, they definitely did. If you look into, so when you start looking into our covered up history, they had this weapon called a fascia that it's like FASCIA, I believe is how you spell, or maybe there's not an I in it. I forget how to spell it, but it looks like it's on our money actually, and it looks like there's some kind of holder for arrows and quivers that people wore on their back, but you can see that it's actually its own thing, that arrows don't go into it. We start to look at, there's different facets of it, excuse me, but it looks like some kind of energy weapon that they would be shooting, some kind of energy weapon. So this is probably what the cities being on fire, I believe that was caused by energy weapons, that there was some kind of war happening that we don't know of, some kind of cowboys versus aliens type of war, the way that we as a society would know about. I believe that the Wild Wild West excuse me, wasn't the Wild Wild West the way they tell us. I believe it was more like cowboys versus aliens. There's several movies and comic books about this type of thing. I think that was probably a real thing. So Yeah, so I think the mud flood was a mixture of a comet, which I don't think it was a comet. So, all right, so so now I got to bring in this part that the moon, I think, is their kind of home base that they've crashed into our universe. We're in a firmament and they crashed in, and now there's some object there called the moon, and we see what's that it that it's in our sky, and we think that it's biblical. But I think that the sun, our current sun, used to be our moon, but it's not a moon the way that we're told a moon is. The Bible tells us there was a light and a lesser light, that God made two lights. I think that there was always sun here. It was because there were two suns, that we had a really hot, bright sun that went around the outside, around like Australia and Antarctica and Greenland and what we know as the North Pole and South Pole. I don't believe it's set up that way. We're definitely not on a ball. We're inside of some kind of ball or something to this effect. And when we look at maps from the 1500s, they used to call Antarctica Tierra del Fuego, which means the land of fire. And it used to be so hot there that nobody could go there. And I had a guest on who told me that there are more dinosaur bones in Antarctica than anywhere else in the world. And it was probably
Really?
Yes. And there was some kind of Jurassic Park down there. And it was so hot, humans couldn't go there. We have in South America, Patagonia, which is the land of the giants. There's a lot of things that involve that. The Nazis, when they left Germany, because they didn't lose World War II, they just moved to the United States and Russia and Argentina, where they did experiments where there's these white skinned, blonde hair, blue eyed Argentinians.
Oh, the twins.
Yes, twins.
Yes.
Yeah, South America. There's a lot of weird stuff happened down there. So what I was getting at was we had two suns. Our sun would have been the lesser light, the one that needed, it was the one for humans because we were smaller, and this is the one we could handle towards the middle of the earth. And then on the outer ring were things that were larger, and that had the hotter sun. So I think that the comet that killed the dinosaurs wasn't a comet. It was actually our larger sun crashed and burned. And that is what hit the earth that set off the earthquakes and the volcanoes that then made mud floods happen all over the world.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I've put a lot of thought into this, and I do a lot of praying and meditating, and I'm in constant communication with Jesus Christ. I do energy work and assist in accordance with Jesus Christ. I help people come to him. And so, all the stuff that I laid out over the last hour plus, it's a lot of evidence. It's all circumstantial, of course, it's all speculation, but it isn't just some flimsy theory that I just one time, I thought of possibly could happen. I have a lot of the details worked out and how this could be very possible. These are all actual things in our history that just nobody strung together. Maybe people have, but I mean, in our history books anyway, they aren't strung together this way. This isn't presented to us this way. Biblical scholars aren't looking to see if in our past that these events could have happened. They're looking to the future as if this hasn't happened. So that's why you have all the confusion of, are we pre-tribulation? Are we in the what's happening? Yeah. Everyone's has their own thoughts, and there's so much evidence to provide anybody to think whatever they like, that they can have cognitive dissonance and say, no, I don't believe that, and not look into it because they have a mountain of evidence that supports their own theory. But that just supports my theory in that everyone's deceived. All the nations will be deceived when Satan is loosed on the earth, which everybody's deceived right now. Nobody is really thinking that the rapture had occurred before, that the millennial kingdom has occurred before. that we're at the final judgment. Everyone thinks that we're about to have the rapture for the first time occur, and they're missing out on so much that has already occurred.
Yeah, just like you're saying, you've looked into it all. It's just the possibilities, aren't there?
Yeah, it's all possibilities. That's what I like to look at, just the possibilities.
Madness, mate, madness.
For sure.
I didn't know any of that, what you just told me. Fascinating.
Okay, well, I'm
Brilliant.
glad I could inform you and maybe trigger you into start looking into all this stuff for yourself. Because, like I said, I was spiritually dead just a few years ago. I was like 2.5 years ago. I didn't have any spiritual connection at all. 6 years ago, I was in prison for burglarizing pharmacies. I was overweight. I was a drug addict. I smoked cigarettes. I was abusive mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I've completely changed as Jesus Christ led me away from all that and into all this. So when I became a conspiracy theorist, I was looking into things like last year, everyone looking into the political stuff, into the children, what's happening with the missing children and all that. And I became psychic and all so much different stuff happened. But after I gave up all the political stuff, that's when Jesus started really revealing truth to me in the sense like you should start looking into this. Like Nephilim are best represented in history by clowns, our perception of clowns. And I'll just briefly touch on that. The clowns. So, firstly, a lot of humans are terrified of clowns, babies, terrified of clowns automatically. We have this thing where they have giant feet, right? They have these way oversized shoes to give them giant feet because they represent the Nephilim, who were very tall and had very large feet, Bigfoot, if you will, the psyop of Bigfoot, big hairy men, which may exist, but they tell us like to think that it's some ape-like creature rather than just a very large human or a very large human-looking being. The clowns also are on stilts to make themselves giant. They have red hair, they have pale faces, they have the makeup on their face. This is all symbolized by clowns, and these are all characteristics of giants, of the Nephilim. And then we look at also how humanity looks at gingers, with red hair and freckles. They say they're soulless demons, right? I'm sure listeners have heard that before. Well, where would that come from? Well, probably because the red-haired, white-skinned beings were giant and they were soulless, and they, exactly as a Nephilim would be, and they were probably wearing makeup because they were zombies. They were dead and they needed to eat a human in order to stay alive. So they had the red nose and the red cheeks because it represents blood as they're eating a human.
Right.
There's so much to it. I mean, you get into Beetlejuice, the way he's in the land of the dead. He has the black and white stripes. He has the very pale face. He has the hair that's poofed out. The black and white stripes also represents the Freemason checkerboard, which the Freemason checkerboard is in between two pillars. And if you were to take your TV before it's digitalized, everything's digitalized now, so we don't have the snow effect that we used to have, the static. That when you look at your TV, turn it on at one time, it would be static. It looked like snow. Well, if you were to zoom in on that, that could look like a checkerboard. And what's it between two pillars? Your TV, your computer, your cell phone. It's all interdimensional devices. It is all there to, they trick us into what the conspiracy theory community believes is this symbolism, but it's actually showing us the truth of where they come from. They come from another dimension. They're low frequency demons. They're static. They're static electricity. And where we once might have had free energy all in our world, Well, now they somehow have harnessed it to like plug it into something, into the moon maybe, and they are using our free energy and making us pay for it. They're building our society on our backs.
That is that's a fascinating perspective. My sister and my mum are gingers. Oh, but they're lovely.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's
and with the clowns, we also have jesters that wear the black and white stripes. You can look up Pueblo clowns. There's a group of South American people who dress up in black and white stripes with the little things coming off their head. They're the DMT machine elves. That's exactly what's going on. So jesters, jokers, clowns, they're all DMT machine elves. It's all the same thing. Nephilim. They're all Nephilim. They come from the place of the dead, the Nephilim. In a Finnish language, the Nephilim means like the home of the dead, the home of the abyss, the home of the ice, something to that effect. I know that I'm not exactly right on how I'm presenting it, but if you were to have something come out of nothing, like if something just walked essentially through your fabric of reality, right? And you had no word for it, you would say it's the nothing. You wouldn't have a name for it. You'd say that's the nothing. Well, Nephilim, that's kind of what that is. You would call it where it comes from. It comes from the nothing. And then we look at the Netherlands, right? The nothing lands. That is where that's their home. The nothing lands, the Netherlands.
Right.
Yeah, it all kind of works out. It's word magic and hidden history, and they tell us to look. There's only 2 verses in the Bible that say Nephilim. That's so we're looking for this specific thing, but the Nephilim is actually just talking about all the beings that come from the land of the dead that were created. The fallen angels didn't have sex with humans. They just used scientifically. They mixed their DNA with other beings, made a host body for these dead things to come into, which also we have the Men in Black that are associated with the UFO sightings. That they look like they wear trench coats and hats and sunglasses, and there's always something wrong about them, and maybe they appear like they're dead white men, but there's always weird stuff about them. Well, that's more Nephilim, that they are now, instead of using clown makeup to make them appear like they're alive, they're using clothes to appear like they're alive, but they're just they're not human. They're just pretending to live amongst us as human.
Would black-eyed kids be anything to do with that?
Could be, yeah. Very well could, because the black-eyed kids and the Men in Black are often associated with one another. That maybe the black-eyed kids somehow are, maybe they're more. So when I talked about earlier, the graphene oxide, the black goo, like Venom. You ever see the movie Venom, Spider-Man's Venom?
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
Well, that's the idea of it. So maybe this graphene oxide is alive. It is its own conscious. A lot of people think that artificial intelligence, it's not going to be a real thing. They're expecting robots to like just become self-aware, but it's not the robot. It's not the software that's making the robot go. It's actually the complete other world that's right in front of us, that it's just, that is alive, and it's pretending to not be alive. It's pretending to not be aware, because it's getting us to build something better for it, which is ourselves. It's just tricking us into going into virtual reality. It's tricking us into doing psychedelics, into going into the astral world, so that it can switch places with us, because it's already done that in the Carrington event. It's switched places with us once before, and it thinks that it can do it successfully again, which I don't think it can successfully do it again, but it's trying to. And that's the black goo that is alive. It reacts to frequency very much the same way Flubber reacts to frequency in that movie Flubber. It's the same type of deal.
Flubber.
Yeah, yeah. With what, Robin Williams, or no, Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy.
Oh, right. Yeah, I know what you mean.
The little green guy. Yeah. So the black eyed kids, what I was getting at with that was that they have huge black eyes because it's the black goo is, in them so much so that they then have completely black soulless looking eyes because they're soulless beings. They come from the abyss, which we call outer space. Space doesn't exist. It's the abyss.
Right.
Yeah.
Fucking hell, mate. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's all stuff that I kind of, put together, and anybody is welcome to tear apart my point of view and my evidence, but there's a lot of it. So
There's a lot to take in.
Yeah, so much. And the thing is, being a psychic, and I've done a ton of psychedelics, or psychonaut as they call it. Why they call it the astronaut, psychonaut? Because it's the same place. Your hyperspace, outer space. It is the same place I go to when I meditate and I'm in the astral world, or when you are astral projecting, or when you're lucid dreaming, or anything that takes you into that existence, virtual reality. Just imagine like what we're doing right now. We're talking through the ether. I have this box set up that connects to your box, and it's just connected through the ether like magic, right? It's not that. It's actually just, and we don't think of it, but it's actually just interdimensional travel. It is a portal that I'm looking at. This portal, I'm talking to this portal, and you're on the other end of the portal, and we just call it cell phones, or we call it computers, or we call it TV, but we're traveling through their dimension in order to have this conversation right now.
That's you've got a point there.
Yeah, and
it's magic in a way, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah, we have black mirrors, where if you look into John Dee and Edward Kelly and we're told it's the 1500s, but it's probably more the 500s in England. They had the black obsidian scrying mirrors, which they would use to contact the dead. You have the black cube worship. Everyone thinks it's the black cube of Saturn. Well, maybe Saturn's involved, but it has nothing to do with the cube itself. It actually just has to do with that represents the other dimension. They tell us in all their symbolism what it is that they are and where they come from. We just interpret it completely wrong because the idea that I present is so far out there that nobody's just going to think of that on their own. That we've been lied to about so much that you really can't come to this conclusion on your own unless you use the discernment of Jesus Christ and you research heavily all these occult topics, all this lost history, as well as the true, well, I don't want to say true, but the mainstream history that's presented to us. You have to piece together everything through pop culture and the Bible. And I mean, my evidence, it comes from so many different sources, but it's all legit evidence that at least mainstream people, if you're not a conspiracy theorist, all these events all exist equally and separately. But if you string them together in the way that I have, well, then it makes a whole lot of sense in conjunction with the Bible's prophecy and the 1,000 years of missing time and all of this stuff. It all fits much better than anything that we're actually told in
definitely
history.
Definitely.
It makes the Bible make a lot more sense too, that we're at the final judgment.
Mind-blowing stuff, this, Todd.
Oh, well, thank you. It is very heavy. It is very heavy.
It is. It's like I said, I've made notes. I will look into all this.
Yeah, well,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
I hope that you can find truth in at least some of the things that I talked about, because they're all real events. It's just, are they all connected? Are they disconnected? I don't think that the War of 1812, the World War of 1812, and the Year Without a Summer 4 years later are disconnected at all. I mean, what's the likelihood of that happening?
Yeah, true.
Yeah, very weird stuff.
It is, mate. It is. Well, I'm going to start looking at this in a minute, actually. Thank you very much, Todd. And Mimi, thank you too.
No, I didn't do much.
She was here. She was my eye candy. I kept looking over at her.
Brilliant, mate. Brilliant. Well, thank you for jumping on, Todd.
Yeah, no problem. So, do you want me to tell the listeners where they can find me?
Yes, please. Yes, but before you go, could you plug yourself, please?
Yes. So my podcast is called Godcast, the Goodness Over Darkness podcast. I am on YouTube at Goodness Over Darkness. My website is EmmanuelKingman.com, which is IMMANUEL Kingman.com. And there you can hit me up for some energy work. I work solely with Jesus Christ, and I can help anybody out there achieve a practical sense of where they are and lose all of this astral type of stuff. You can hit up anybody for a quote unquote reading, but they could all be lying to you and just taking your money and telling you what to do. Not that everybody is, but a lot of people are. I don't do that. I will help you with practical information, help you achieve what you want to achieve without anybody assisting you. I give you the information, I unlock you a little bit with my psychic capabilities, and send Jesus, and you and Jesus just mix together, and you don't need me. You don't need anybody else. You can figure it all out on your own.
Okay. Well, I'll put your contacts in the show notes as well, Todd.
All right, cool. Yeah, and anybody wants to email me, I love emailing back and forth, so feel free to email me, the Great Chakra Awakening 777 at gmail.com. You can hit me up on there. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can find all that stuff on my website. They're all linked there, so I won't give all them out here, but yeah, hit me up if if you guys have any questions or anything. You can send me a DM, send me an email, or whatever.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me on, my friend. It was a great pleasure to come on here and speak to you.
Brilliant. There's a lot to take in here, but it's the information that needs sharing.
Yes, a lot of information, and I hope that it helps somebody out there find the truth.
Thank you, sir. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
You as well, my friend.
Thank you very much, Todd.